The scream that came from the nursery did not sound like hunger or a bad dream. It sounded like my baby had looked straight at death and understood it. I was in the kitchen, and the house had been quiet in that careful way we lived with. The kind of quiet where every small noise made you listen twice. I ran to the hallway and hit the nursery door with my palm. It did not move. We kept that door locked. We kept every door locked. My fingers shook as I dug for the key on the ring I never stopped carrying. The metal scraped my skin. The scream rose again, higher, broken, like air being stolen. My wife came up behind me so fast her shoulder hit mine. I heard her breathing, sharp and controlled, like she had already decided something. I finally got the key into the lock. It stuck for half a second, like the door itself resisted being opened. Then it turned and I pushed in. The room smelled like baby powder and warm milk and something else, something metallic. My teenage son stood over the crib. He held a kitchen knife in his right hand, angled down. The blade caught the night light and flashed once. My daughter lay on her back, red-faced, arms jerking, making that raw sound that did not stop. On her thigh and stomach I saw thin lines of blood, more than one. They looked small, but they were real. He had already started. My mind tried to make it not true. It tried to turn it into a mistake, a joke, anything. But my son did not look surprised. He looked calm. He looked like he had been waiting for us to open the door. My wife moved first. She did not scream. She did not hesitate. Her hand snapped out and struck his wrist. The knife clattered against the crib rail, then fell somewhere out of sight. In the same motion she drove into him, hard with her whole body, and he stumbled back into the dresser. I reached into the crib and took my daughter up against my chest. Her little body shook like a bird caught in a hand. Her screams hit my ear and went straight through me. I felt her warm blood on my forearm. Behind me, wood thudded against a wall. My wife made a low sound I had never heard from her before. It was not fear. It was not even anger. It was something older. I turned halfway. I saw my wife's fists rising and falling. I saw my son trying to cover his face. I saw his eyes find mine for a second, and in that second my legs did not move toward them. My voice did not come out. I did not tell her to stop. One locked door, one knife, and one choice that still haunted me decades later. I carried my baby out of that room and I did not go back in, even though I knew I could have stopped what happened next. So why did I not? Before any knife, before any locks on doors, I remembered how badly we wanted him. My wife and I had planned for a baby the way careful people plan for anything. We saved money. We read books. We argued gently about names. When she told me she was pregnant, I had felt a clean kind of joy. I had walked around our small house touching things like they were already part of a new life. I built the crib with my own hands and checked every screw twice. I pictured a tired, happy home. I pictured noise that meant life. The first weeks felt normal. He fed. He slept in short bursts. He looked at us with that blank newborn stare, and I thought I could handle anything. Then the crying started changing. It stopped being a signal we could answer. It became a sound that filled the whole house like smoke. It lasted for hours, then most of the day, then most of the night. It did not matter if he had eaten. It did not matter if he was dry, warm, rocked, held, walked, driven in the car, placed in a swing, laid on my chest, laid in the crib, swaddled tight, swaddled loose. The crying kept coming, hard and furious, like pain. Sometimes he screamed until his face went dark red and the veins stood up at his temples. Sometimes he cried so long he made a thin wheezing sound, like he was running out of air. My wife and I took turns, and still we both fell apart. We went to the pediatrician again and again. They checked his ears. They checked his stomach. They asked about formula, then breastfeeding, then a different formula. They suggested gas drops. They suggested keeping him upright after feeding. They suggested we stop caffeine. We did everything. We spent money we did not have on special bottles and special nipples, like the shape of plastic could fix whatever lived inside that scream. At first, friends and family came over with smiles and advice. They said, "This is what Bobbies do." They said, "You will miss it one day." They offered to hold him, but after a few minutes their eyes changed. The crying climbed into their shoulders, into their jaws. They handed him back like a hot object. Some stopped visiting. Some stopped calling. The world did not say it out loud, but it quietly blamed us, like we were failing a test other parents passed. Nights were the worst. I remembered the way our hallway looked at 2 in the morning. The dim light, the closed doors, the silence outside our house, while inside our house there was only that sound. My wife sat in the rocking chair until her arms shook from holding him. I walked him in circles until my knees ached. We watched the clock like it was an enemy. When he finally slept, even for 10 minutes, we did not relax. We waited for the next wave, holding our breath, listening for the first inhale that meant it was starting again. I started going to work with a ringing in my ears. I forgot simple things. I stared at people while they spoke and barely understood words. My wife started crying in the bathroom with the tap running. We did not fight much, but when we did, it was ugly because there was nowhere to put the fear and helplessness. We kept asking each other, what are we missing? What are we doing wrong? We loved him. We were trying. It did not matter. There were moments that scared me more than the crying itself. Sometimes he went still for a second, quiet and tense, like the scream was gathering strength. He looked at us with a hard stare that did not match a baby's face. Then the sound came back louder, almost angry. Once, when I leaned close to check his mouth for a sore, he jerked his head and bit my finger. It should have been nothing. He was tiny. But the bite was not a soft baby mistake. It was a clamp. It left a mark that stayed for days. We kept chasing reasons. Colic, reflux, allergies, a hidden infection, a problem with his nervous system. We saw specialists who spoke in calm voices and used careful words. They did not find anything that explained what we lived with. One doctor told us some bobbies are just high needs. Another said you need to rest when he rests, as if the sound did not follow us into sleep. We tried everything that did not hurt him. Warm baths, white noise, gentle music, changing the room temperature, different kinds of touch, more light, less light. I held him so long my back went numb. My wife sang the same song until she hated it. We were not careless parents. We were not absent. We were there every second, and still the crying ruled the house. That year changed us. I learned to move through my own home like I was walking past a warning sign. I learned to read my wife's face for signs she was breaking. I learned the difference between normal tired and dangerous tired, the kind where you pictured stepping outside and not coming back. We never did, but we both thought about it. We were ashamed of that. Shame became part of our air. People later asked when it started, like there was a clean beginning. I always wanted to say it started with a baby in a crib and 2 parents who could not make him feel safe. This did not start with teenage rage. It started in the crib. The strange part was how it ended, not with a gradual improvement, not with a clear cause finally solved. One day, after more than 13 months of living in a constant alarm, the crying slowed. Then it stopped. My wife and I stood in the kitchen holding our breath, waiting for it to start again. We looked at each other like survivors. We thought we had reached the other side. We thought the worst part was behind us. When the crying finally stopped, we thought it was over, but something worse replaced it. When the crying stopped, the silence did not feel like peace. It felt like a pause before something fell. He started destroying things as soon as he could move on his own. At first it looked like normal clumsiness. A cup knocked off a table, a toy thrown too hard. Then it became deliberate. He tore books page by page while staring at me, like he wanted me to watch the damage happen. He snapped the heads off dolls at relatives' houses and left them under couches like hidden threats. If I took something away, he did not cry and beg like other kids. He searched for something else to break. We stopped buying nice things. We stopped hanging pictures at his height. We stopped leaving anything on counters. Every room became a test. If I forgot and left my keys on a table, he took them and hid them. If I left a wallet where he could reach it, money disappeared. It was not about needing it. It was about control. He learned early that he could make our day collapse with one small action. The worst part was how planned it felt. He did not just make messes. He sabotaged. He soiled himself long after doctors told us it was not physical. He did it when he was angry, when he did not get what he wanted, and sometimes when the day had been calm, like he needed to remind us that calm was temporary. He smeared it on walls. He put it into heating vents. He hid it in laundry baskets so it would be found later by smell first, then by touch. My wife cleaned with her mouth tight and her eyes blank. I helped, and I still could not believe we were living like that. We tried to talk to people about it. The words did not work. When I said he hurt the cat or he threatened a neighbor kid, people looked for a simple reason. They asked what we fed him. They asked if we spanked him. They asked if he watched bad television. It always came back to us like the problem had to be parenting. So we started lying. We smiled. We said he was going through a phase. Then we went home and checked every room before we went to bed. School made it worse because school did not have our fear yet. He was bright enough to fool teachers for short stretches. Then he exploded. He hit kids. He threw chairs. He tore down classroom boards. He pulled fire alarms. He ran out of the building and made staff chase him into streets. Each time the phone rang during work hours, my stomach tightened because I knew what it was. He got removed from more than one school. Meetings happened in small offices with polite voices and tired eyes. They used words like behavioral issues and oppositional. They offered plans. They offered evaluations. We signed papers and waited for appointments. We sat in waiting rooms holding his hand while he twisted his fingers in mine until it hurt. When the door opened and his name was called, he walked in calm and walked out unchanged. At home, we started changing our house the way people changed houses in storms. Not to stop the storm, but to survive it. We bought locks first for cabinets, then drawers, then closets, then doors. The kitchen became the most dangerous place, not because of food, because of tools, scissors, screwdrivers, steak knives, anything with an edge. We moved knives into a locked box. Then he found the key. We moved the key to a higher place. Then he climbed. We installed a lock on the pantry. He kicked it until the screws loosened. We replaced screws with longer ones. He tried again. Every time we tightened one part of our life, he pushed somewhere else. It felt like living with someone who studied us. We stopped inviting people over because we could not predict what he would do in front of them. He learned the power of embarrassment. If we had visitors, he performed. He shouted things that were not true. He broke something and blamed us. He stared at strangers with a cold focus until they looked away. After they left, my wife and I stood in the doorway listening to their car drive off, and neither of us spoke. We did not want anyone to know the truth. But we also wanted someone to see it and take him away from us. The first time I realized we were afraid of our own child, he was still small. He stood in the hallway with a screwdriver he had stolen from a toolbox. He did not swing it like a toy. He held it like a weapon, point out, testing the weight. When I told him to drop it, he smiled. Not a happy smile. A smile that said he liked the moment where I had to decide how close to come. That pattern grew with him. As he got older, his body caught up to his anger. He shoved my wife hard enough to put her into a cabinet. He punched a hole in a door. He grabbed our dog by the neck and dragged it across a room until I pulled him off. Later, I found a burned spot on the carpet in his bedroom and a box of matches under his mattress. Another time, I found a dead bird in a jar. I told myself it was curiosity, that kids did strange things, but I knew the truth. He wanted to see what happened when something struggled. We kept chasing help. Therapy, psychiatrists, medication changes, family sessions where we sat on couches and tried to speak calmly while he stared at the floor like he was bored. Some professionals looked scared when he spoke. Others looked annoyed as if he was a difficult student. Nothing softened him. Nothing lowered the danger. If anything, he learned new language for it. He learned what words made adults hesitate. The day he stabbed me did not come from nowhere. It came from years of small warnings that became normal. I had caught him in the kitchen, where he was not supposed to be, with a knife from the block we thought we had secured. I stepped toward him slowly and told him to put it down. He moved fast, like he had been waiting for my body to come into range. The blade punched into my side and slid out with a wet sound I still heard when the house got quiet. I did not even feel pain at first. I felt surprise, like my body could not accept it. Then heat spread under my shirt and my knees tried to fold. My wife screamed my name. My son backed away, still holding the knife, watching my face like he wanted to see what the injury did to me. There was no panic in him, no regret, only interest. The cut was not deep enough to kill me, but it left scars that stayed. The bigger scar was what it did to our home. After that, we did not talk about safety like it was a future idea. We acted like a prison had to be built room by room around ourselves. We installed heavier doors. We added deadbolts where deadbolts did not belong. We put keyed locks on interior rooms, including our own bedroom. Keys became part of our bodies. I slept with them under my pillow. My wife wore one on a chain when she cooked. People assumed we were locking him in. The truth was uglier. They were not locking him in. They were locking themselves away. Even then, in that fortified house, I still scanned for danger every minute. I listened for footsteps that stopped outside a door. I listened for drawers opening. I counted silence as much as I counted noise. If something fell upstairs, my heart raced like a warning bell. I lived waiting for the next sharp moment, and my wife lived the same way, her shoulders always tight, her eyes always checking corners. We had locks, we had professionals, we had plans written on paper, but the danger did not shrink. It learned our routines and grew inside them. Even with locks and therapy, the danger did not shrink, it grew. When my wife told me she was pregnant again, I did not smile. My first thought was not a name, or a nursery, or tiny socks. My first thought was the sound of a lock turning, and the way my son watched me bleed. She stood in the kitchen with one hand on the counter like she needed the wood to keep steady. Her voice stayed flat, controlled. Mine did too. We spoke like we were discussing a bill, because if we let real emotion in, it would have flooded the room. I looked past her at the doorway, half expecting my son to appear and listen, because he always listened. We had not planned it. We had stopped trying for children a long time before that. Not because we did not want a family, but because we already had one that felt like it might not survive. Our life had become a system of rules built around him. We were tired in a way that did not go away with sleep. We were afraid in a way that did not go away with daylight. I remembered the first pregnancy and how clean it had felt. This one felt like we had brought a candle into a room filled with gas. My wife asked me, very quietly, what did we do? I knew she did not mean how did this happen. She meant what did we do by letting our lives become this. She meant what did we do by staying. She meant what did we do by thinking we could keep anyone safe in our house. We talked about options in whispers late at night behind a locked bedroom door. We did not call it fear at first. We called it being practical. We said words like timing and resources and stress, like we were managing schedules. But it was fear. It was fear that the new baby would be like our son had been. Fear that we would not survive another year of constant screaming. Fear that we would create another person who hurt others, and that it would be our fault again. There was another fear we never said all at once. We were afraid of what our son would do to a baby. We had already seen what he did to animals. We had already seen how he liked helpless things. We had already seen how he punished us by destroying what we cared about. The idea of bringing something small and defenseless into his reach made my stomach turn. I could not picture a crib in our house without picturing him standing over it. My wife did not break down. She did not waver. She looked at me and said she was keeping the baby. She said it in the same tone she used when she locked the doors at night. A decision made for survival. I asked her if she was sure, and she nodded once hard. Then she said something else, even quieter. If the baby was not okay, we would not keep it. She did not mean if the baby was sick in a normal way. She meant if the baby showed signs. If the baby carried whatever darkness had grown in our son. We could not handle that again. We could not do it again to ourselves, and we could not do it again to the world. We did not talk about that part with anyone. Not family, not friends, not doctors. We held it like a secret that burned our hands. It felt cruel. It felt like betrayal before the child even existed. It also felt like the only honest plan we had made in years. We even agreed on a second contingency, the one that hurt to say out loud. If the baby was fine but our home was not, we would consider adoption. We would find a way to place her somewhere safe, somewhere normal, if we could not protect her from what lived under our roof. I hated myself for discussing it, and I still signed my name to the thought in my mind, because I could not pretend love alone would stop a teenager who had already stabbed his father. Pregnancy did not soften our house, it sharpened it. My wife grew tired and nauseous, and my son seemed to sense weakness like a smell. He hovered. He watched her belly with a strange expression I could not read. Some days he ignored it. Other days he made comments that turned my blood cold. He asked what would happen when it cried. He asked if it would sleep with the door locked too. He smiled when he asked, like it was a joke we were supposed to laugh at. I stood between him and my wife more than once without thinking. I started walking her to the car like we lived in a bad neighborhood, except the danger was inside the house. I caught myself checking that her bedroom door locked properly, then checking it again. I could not stop. When labor came, I felt relief and dread together. Relief that the waiting would end. Dread that the real danger would begin. At the hospital, with bright lights and clean sheets, I almost believed we were normal. Almost. Then my daughter was born, and the world changed in one breath. She cried, but it was the normal cry I barely remembered from years ago. She rooted and fed. She slept against my wife's chest and relaxed, her tiny hands opening and closing like she was testing the air. Nurses smiled at her and did not look worried. Doctors did their checks and did not pull us aside for serious talks. My wife looked at me with wet eyes, and for the first time in years her face held something soft. Hope, not the desperate kind, the real kind. In the first weeks at home, I watched my daughter do ordinary baby things, and it felt unreal. She slept and woke and smiled without that endless rage behind her eyes. She looked at us like we were her safe place. I had not known how much I needed to be seen that way until it happened. For the first time, we saw what parenting could have been. That relief did not only fill us, it exposed everything else. It made the contrast in our home impossible to hide. It made my son's presence feel heavier, like a storm cloud in a bright sky. He watched us hold her. He watched her coo. He watched my wife laugh, and something in him tightened. And that was when his rage burned hotter. My daughter did not heal our house, but she showed us what had been missing inside it. She slept in short, normal stretches, and when she woke, she did not wake in panic. Her cries came with simple causes: hungry, wet, cold. The first time I fed her a bottle and she relaxed against my arm, I felt something in my chest loosen that I had kept tight for years. It was not happiness yet. It was the absence of alarm. My wife started laughing again in small bursts, like the sound surprised her. I heard her talking to the baby in a soft voice I had not heard since our first child was an infant. I watched her face change as she rocked our daughter, and it hurt because it reminded me that my wife had not always looked like someone bracing for impact. Then my son walked through the room and the air changed. He was a teenager by then, taller than his mother, heavy in the shoulders, always moving like he owned every doorway. He did not speak to the baby with curiosity. He looked at her like she was a new object in a house he already controlled. When she babbled, he stared until she went quiet. When she cried, he smiled as if the sound proved something. I started measuring the distance between him and the crib without thinking. I moved the baby to the opposite side of the room when he entered. I kept my body between them. Sometimes I caught myself holding my breath until he left. The changes in me happened slowly, which was the most shameful part. If it had been one clear moment, I could have named it and fought it. But it did not happen in a single day. It happened in 100 small choices that felt like survival. When my son spoke, I answered with fewer words. When he asked for something, I delayed. When he complained, I pretended not to hear. I told myself I was staying calm. I told myself I was not feeding his anger. The truth was that I had started withdrawing because I could not afford to give him my full attention anymore. Attention meant risk. With the baby in the house, the stakes changed. Before, I feared for my wife and for myself. Now I feared for someone who could not run, could not lock a door, could not even understand why a voice sounded wrong. Every time my son slammed a cabinet or paced the hallway, my mind did not go to what he might do to me. It went to what he might do to her. We began living in two worlds at once. In one world, my daughter learned to smile. She grabbed my finger and held it with surprising strength. She made little sounds that were almost laughter. In the other world, my son tested boundaries like he always had, but now he did it with a new focus, like he needed to prove that the baby did not change anything. He started making noise on purpose when she slept. A loud cough outside her door, a heavy step on the stairs, a sudden bang in the kitchen. Each time she startled awake, he looked toward us to see what we would do. If my wife glared at him, he smirked. If I told him to stop, he leaned in like he wanted a fight. My wife and I did not say much to each other about it because saying it out loud made it real in a way we could not bear. But we moved through the house like guards. We checked locks twice. We kept the baby's door secured even when we were home, even when we were awake. We told ourselves it was caution. It was fear. There were moments I hated myself for, moments that still made my throat tighten decades later. My son would come into the living room and stand there, waiting for someone to acknowledge him like a challenge. And I would be sitting with my daughter on my chest, feeling her warm breath, feeling her trust, and I would think, please go away. Not because I wanted him gone forever in that moment, but because I wanted the calm to last one more minute. I wanted one more minute where the world felt normal. I never said those words. I did not have to. He saw them on my face. He began forcing choices. If I played with the baby, he made a scene. If I spoke to my wife gently, he interrupted. If I put the baby down to cook, he suddenly needed something from the kitchen. He filled doorways. He lurked near stairs. He learned that our love for the baby could be used like a lever. Sometimes he acted almost polite, which was worse. He would speak in a careful voice and ask about her, and my body would not relax. I watched his hands instead of his eyes. I watched where he stood. I watched whether he blocked the exit. When I did not answer fast enough, the politeness vanished and the contempt returned. At night, after we finally got the baby asleep, my wife and I sat in our locked room and listened to the house. The upstairs creaked. A faucet turned on. A door opened and closed. My wife would whisper, "Where was he?" And I would whisper back, "I did not know." That was the truth too often. Even inside our own home, we did not always know where our son was. I started thinking of him as weather, something that moved through the house and could not be reasoned with, something you prepared for and waited out. I hated that thought because it took away his humanity, and I knew he was still our child. But every time I tried to see him as a child again, I remembered the knife that went into my side, the dead bird in the jar, the matches under the mattress. My compassion always collided with fear. The baby made the contrast brutal. With her, love felt easy. It flowed without effort. With him, love felt like a task that could get someone killed. My wife noticed my distance before I admitted it to myself. One night she asked in a quiet voice, "Do you even want to talk to him anymore?" I did not answer right away. The silence between us felt like a confession. I finally said, "I did not know how." And that was true. I did not know how to reach him without putting a target on the baby. In those months, my son stopped being my son in my mind and became a problem that never slept. Every day I woke up already tired, already bracing, already bargaining with myself. Just keep the peace. Just get through today. Just keep her safe. They did not choose to love their son less in a single day. They ran out slowly. And my son felt it. He started pushing harder, not to get love back, but to punish us for giving it to someone else. He stopped trying to speak to me like a son. He started speaking to me like an enemy. Then the fights became the only language left between father and son. By the time my son turned 17, we stopped having conversations. We only had battles. They started the same way almost every day, like a script we all memorized. He entered a room and tested the air with a comment, something small that carried a blade inside it. If I answered, he pushed. If I did not answer, he pushed harder. Within minutes, voices rose, doors shook, and the baby started crying because the sound of our house meant danger. I dreaded coming home from work. It was not the tired dread of a long day. It was a tight feeling in my throat, like I had to step into a room where someone waited to hit me. I sat in my car sometimes with the engine off, listening to the quiet outside, trying to stretch those last seconds where nothing happened. Then I walked to the front door and checked the windows as I passed them, not for strangers, but for my own child. The fights became predictable. He demanded something, usually control dressed up as a need. Money, the car, a key, access to the kitchen, access to the baby. If we refused, he called us names that were meant to injure. If we gave in, he demanded more because winning once taught him we could be moved. My wife and I tried different strategies, like people trying different locks on the same broken door. Calm voices, firm rules, ignoring him. None of it changed the ending. The house always ended up loud. My wife reacted faster than I did. The moment my son stepped close to the baby, she snapped. Her voice went sharp and loud, not a normal mother scolding a teenager, but a command meant to stop an attack before it started. Get away. Now, back up. She sounded like someone who had already pictured the worst outcome and was trying to prevent it with sound alone. My son loved it. He leaned into her fear. He drifted closer just to make her scream again, like he could feed on it. I tried to stand between them, but I also tried to keep the baby out of it, and that was impossible. The baby lived in the middle of our fear. If she slept, my son made noise. If she cried, he complained. If she laughed, he stared until she stopped. My wife started carrying her from room to room like a shield and a treasure at the same time. She never set her down without checking the doors. She never walked away without looking over her shoulder. We divided the house without saying we did. The baby's room stayed locked. Our bedroom stayed locked. The kitchen stayed controlled. My son roamed the spaces we could not fully secure, and we moved around him like we were avoiding an animal that might charge. Sometimes I saw how insane it looked from the outside. A father inching through his own hallway with keys in his fist. A mother listening for footsteps before she opened a door. A teenager standing in the center of it all, smiling because he knew the truth. He ruled the mood of the whole building. Then he started leaving. At first he stormed out after fights, slamming the door so hard the frame trembled. He stayed gone for an hour or two, then came back demanding to be let in like he had been wronged. Later he left for longer stretches. Whole afternoons, whole nights. We never knew where he went. Friends, parks, someone else's basement. I told myself it was normal teenage rebellion, but it did not feel normal. It felt like the only safe hours we got were the hours when the threat chose to walk away. Those were the hours when my wife and I finally breathed. It shamed me how quickly my body learned to relax when he was gone. The house still had locks and scars and broken things, but without him inside it, the air changed. My wife's shoulders dropped. The baby slept longer. I could wash a dish without listening for footsteps behind me. I could sit on the couch and feel the cushions instead of feeling the next impact coming. Peace only arrived when he was not there, and that made peace feel like something stolen, something temporary, something we did not deserve. Sometimes we did not speak during those quiet hours. We just moved carefully, trying not to waste them. My wife cleaned the kitchen with fast, silent motions, as if she wanted the place to look normal before he returned and wrecked it again. I checked the locks more than once. Even though I knew locks did not stop him, they only slowed him. We both watched the clock, not because we wanted him back, but because we knew he would come back eventually and we needed to be ready. When he did return, the change was immediate. My wife heard his footsteps before I did. She reacted like a pulled wire. Her voice rose without warning. Where were you? Do not come near her. Do not touch that. Back up. The baby felt it too. She started whimpering as soon as my son's voice entered the room, like her body recognized him as a problem before her mind could. My son noticed that and smiled wider, pleased with the proof that he affected all of us. It did something ugly to my sense of right and wrong. I started thinking about my son in terms of minutes of safety, not in terms of love. I started measuring my days by how long he stayed away. When he was gone, I felt grateful. When he came back, I felt anger that he had returned at all. I hated myself for it, but the feeling did not leave. It settled in and became normal, which was worse. We still tried to get him help. We still made calls and went to meetings and listened to professionals talk about plans. But inside the house, none of that mattered. Inside the house, it was only survival. My wife stopped asking me to fix him. She started asking me to keep the baby behind a locked door while she cooked. She started flinching when a floorboard creaked. She started sleeping with her phone in her hand, like help might be one button away, even though we both knew help never arrived fast enough. In that house, peace only happened when he was not there. Then one afternoon he disappeared again, and the quiet lasted longer than usual. It stretched past dinner. It stretched past midnight. My wife did not say it, but I saw relief fighting with fear on her face. Relief because he was gone. Fear because we did not know where he was, and not knowing meant we could not predict what came next. We finally got the baby down and sat in the dark listening. The front door never opened. No footsteps on the porch. No key in the lock. Just the steady hum of the refrigerator and the slow sound of our breathing. That was when I heard a soft scrape near the back of the house, so faint I almost convinced myself it was nothing. Then I heard it again, followed by the tiny click of a window latch moving. He did not come back through the door. One day he came back quietly, through a window. After he started coming and going through windows, we stopped thinking of our house as walls. We thought of it as layers. We had a system, and it ran on keys. I kept a ring in my pocket and another copy hidden where even my wife had to pause to remember it. She wore a key on a chain under her shirt, not for convenience, but because if it dangled in the open, he could grab it. The sound of metal became a warning in our home. If I heard keys jingle in the wrong place, my body reacted before my mind did. We locked cabinets, then we locked doors, then we locked ourselves. The baby's room had a lock that only opened from the outside. Our bedroom had a heavier door with a deadbolt that belonged on a front entrance, not inside a house. The bathroom door had a latch we could slide shut without looking, because there were moments we needed a barrier fast. The kitchen had its own set of rules. Knives stayed in a locked box. Scissors stayed in a locked drawer. Tools lived in a container with a padlock. We did not leave anything sharp out, not even for a second, because a second was enough. People who saw our house for the first time thought we were imprisoning him. They were wrong. We did not have the power to imprison him. We were the ones hiding. We were the ones creating small spaces where the baby could breathe without him standing over her. We were not locking him in. We were locking ourselves away. Every morning started with the same mental math. Where was the baby? Where was he? Which doors were between them? Which locks were engaged? Which keys were on my body? I checked the baby's door first. Then the kitchen. Then the back window because he liked that one. I looked for scratches on the frame, for dirt on the sill, for any sign he had tested it during the night. I did it even when I told myself it was pointless. The ritual made me feel like I was doing something. My wife did her own checks faster, sharper. She tested locks with her palm like she expected a door to swing open and reveal him standing there. She listened for the soft sounds that meant he was awake upstairs. A floorboard creak, a drawer, a cough that sounded forced. If she heard nothing, she did not relax. Silence meant he was planning. Exhaustion changed how we thought. It narrowed everything. We stopped thinking in days and started thinking in moments. Make it to nap time. Make it to dinner. Make it to bedtime. When your brain lived like that long enough, even terrible decisions started looking normal because your only goal was to keep moving. That morning began like so many others, with his voice cutting through the house before the sun fully rose. He wanted into the kitchen. I told him no. I told him it was not open without one of us in it because we had learned that he used the kitchen like an armory. He called me weak. He called my wife names I will not repeat. He stepped close enough that I smelled him, and he said he could get in any time he wanted. He did not need our keys. He said he had other ways. My wife stood behind me with the baby in her arms, and I felt her shaking, not from fear alone, but from rage she tried to contain. She told him to back away from the baby. He laughed like it was funny that she thought she could order him. He moved his shoulders like he was stretching before a fight. I tried to end it. I told him to leave the house if he could not follow the rules. I expected him to shove me, to break something, to throw a threat into the air. Instead, he stared at me for a long time, quiet enough that the quiet itself felt like a weapon. Then he turned and walked out without slamming the door. That made me more nervous than any shouting. I waited at the window and watched him cross the yard and disappear down the street. My wife did not speak until he was out of sight. Then she exhaled like she had been holding her breath for an hour. The baby made a soft sound and settled against her shoulder, and for a moment it almost looked like a normal scene. We did not trust it. We never trusted it. We moved through our routine with the caution of people handling glass. My wife fed the baby in the living room with her back to the wall so she could see both doorways. I stayed near the kitchen and kept the keys on me, not because I planned to use them, but because losing them meant losing time. Time was the only thing locks ever gave us. They believed the locks bought them time, seconds, not safety. When the baby finally went down for her nap, we did it like a procedure. My wife carried her to the nursery and I followed, watching the hallway behind us. She laid her in the crib, checked her blanket, kissed her forehead, and then stepped back as if she had placed something fragile on a shelf. I closed the door and turned the key. I tested the knob twice. My wife tested it once, harder, and nodded like she approved. Then we went to the kitchen and allowed ourselves a small, dangerous luxury. We made coffee. Not a relaxed cup at a table, just a few minutes standing by the counter, eyes scanning the windows, ears tuned to the house. The quiet was so deep I heard the refrigerator motor start and stop. I heard the clock tick. I heard my own swallowing. My wife started talking about nothing important, which was how I knew she was trying to pretend. She said we should buy more diapers. She said we needed to fix the back latch. Her voice sounded almost normal, and it scared me because normal never lasted. I remember holding my mug and looking at the kitchen door, thinking about how a single lock separated us from sharp objects, and how a single door separated our daughter from him. I remember thinking that if he came back, we would hear it. We always heard him. We did not. The first sound was not a door. It was not footsteps. It was not the rattle of keys. It was the baby. At first it was just a cry, and my body began its usual response, that automatic rush to protect her. Then the cry changed into something I had never heard from her before. It rose into a thin, wild scream that did not sound like hunger or discomfort. It sounded like terror, pure and immediate, like she had seen something no baby should ever see. Then we heard a soft thud upstairs, and the nursery lock clicked from the other side. The baby scream cut through the house and erased every other thought in my head. I dropped my mug and it hit the floor, but I did not look down. My wife was already moving before I moved, like her body had practiced for this moment in nightmares. We ran for the stairs. The sound came again, higher, sharper, not like pain, not like hunger. It sounded like fear with no words. My feet hit the first step and I took two at a time. My hand went to my pocket for the keys and I felt them there, cold metal, too many teeth, too many choices for a moment that needed one. Halfway up I saw the nursery door at the end of the hall. The door was shut. The lock was the kind that only opened from the outside. It was supposed to make a safe room. It was supposed to be the one place in the house that could not be reached without us. Then I saw the knob turn slightly, slow and controlled from inside. My stomach dropped. I reached the hallway and my legs felt wrong, like they did not belong to me. The scream stopped for one breath, and in that tiny gap I heard something else. A soft sound of fabric shifting, the crib creaking, someone breathing too close. I jammed the key ring into my palm and tried to pick the right key by feel. My fingers shook. The keys slipped and scraped my skin. I tried the first key and it did not fit. The metal hit the lock with a dull click that felt loud enough to wake the whole street. Behind me, my wife was right on my shoulder. I could feel her heat. I could hear her breathing fast and controlled like she was preparing to strike. She did not speak my name. She did not need to. We both knew that if the baby sounded like that, something had already crossed a line. I tried another key. It went in but would not turn. My hand cramped around the ring. I told myself, steady, steady, but my hand was not steady. I heard another small sound inside the room, and then the baby's scream started again, weaker now, like she was running out of air. My wife pushed past me just enough to see the lock. She did not take the keys from me. She just pointed, sharp and certain, at a key near the end of the ring. I did not remember adding it there, but I trusted her. I pulled it free and shoved it into the lock. It turned. The moment the bolt slid back, the door moved inward from the pressure on the other side, like it had been held. My breath stopped. My wife shoved the door open hard enough that it hit the wall. The nursery smelled wrong, not like smoke or rot. It smelled like sweat and metal and something sharp that did not belong around a sleeping child. My son stood over the crib. He was angled toward the baby, his shoulders hunched forward, his head lowered as if he was speaking to her. His hand was raised. In his hand was a kitchen knife. For one frozen second, my mind refused to accept it, even though I saw it, even though I had imagined it 100 times. The blade caught the light from the hallway and it looked clean and bright in a room that was supposed to be soft. My daughter lay on her back, small arms jerking, face turned away as far as she could turn. There were thin marks on her skin, superficial cuts, just enough to show blood. My body surged forward without permission, not to fight, to cover, to block, to take her away. I took one step and my foot hit a toy on the floor and it slid. The slip slowed me, and that half-second was all it took for me to see what he was doing. He dragged the knife across the baby's face in a slow, taunting way. Not a deep cut, not a strike meant to finish it. A message. A way to show us he could touch her whenever he wanted, even in the one room we had locked. The baby screamed again and the sound went through me like electricity. My throat tightened and my vision narrowed. I remember thinking, this is real, this is happening, and I felt something in my mind tear away like paper. My wife did not freeze. She moved in a straight line, fast and violent like a spring that finally released. Her hand hit his wrist hard from the side, not grabbing, not wrestling, just snapping the angle away. The knife flew out of his hand and clattered against the wall and dropped out of sight. The sound was short and sharp and final. My son turned toward her, surprised, and in that surprise my wife drove her shoulder into his chest and shoved him back. He hit the wall with a heavy thud that made the picture frame above the changing table jump. He tried to bring his hands up, and she struck again, fast, trained, not like a scared mother but like someone who had decided there would be no second chance. I did not watch long, I could not. My eyes went to the crib. My hands went forward and I lifted my daughter out. She felt lighter than she should have, like fear had made her weightless. She was shaking. Her face was wet with tears. There was a smear of blood where the knife had been. Her breath hitched, and then she made a small choking sound that terrified me more than the screaming. I pressed her against my chest and turned my body so I was between her and the room, between her and both of them. I backed out into the hall without thinking, still holding her. My arms locked around her as if I could fuse her to my body and keep her safe inside my ribs. Behind me, inside the nursery, the sounds changed. There were impacts, a grunt, a sharp inhale. My wife's breathing stayed loud and steady. My son made a sound that was half anger, half pain, and then another sound like he was trying to speak but could not find words. There was no begging. There was no apology. There was only struggle. I moved down the hallway with my daughter held tight. My mind tried to split into two tasks: check her, stop the bleeding, keep her warm, and also make sense of what I had seen: my son in the nursery, the lock defeated, the knife from our kitchen, the calm way he had stood over her. My daughter's cuts were shallow, but the sight of them made my hands shake worse than they had at the lock. I carried her into our bedroom and shut the door behind me. I locked it. Then I locked it again, as if the second turn would change reality. I laid her on the bed and leaned close to her face, searching for anything worse than what I could see. I touched her cheek with the back of my finger. She flinched hard. That flinch told me she was still here, still alive, still able to feel. I whispered her name over and over, not for her but for me, like saying it could keep her in the world. The sounds from the nursery still came through the wall. I heard my wife's feet moving. I heard my son hit something. I heard furniture scrape. I heard a muffled cry that might have been his. I should have run back in. I should have stepped between them. I should have tried to stop what was happening. But I did not. I stood over my daughter and felt the hot, clear certainty that I could not protect her and protect him at the same time. I felt a hard calm settle into my chest, and it scared me because it did not feel like panic. It felt like acceptance. I heard my wife shout once, a sound that was not words, only force, and then I heard my son's body hit the floor. I lifted my daughter again and held her against me, rocking without rhythm, listening to the house like it was holding its breath with us. The knife had fallen somewhere in that nursery. It was not in his hand anymore. But the danger in our home did not disappear just because the blade was out of his grip. The knife was gone, the threat was not. I heard my wife stop moving for a moment, and that pause scared me more than the impacts. In the bedroom, I held my daughter against my chest and listened through the wall. My wife had been fast when she knocked the knife away, fast when she shoved him into the wall. But then there was a gap, a breath, a stillness, like she had arrived at a decision point inside herself. I knew that sound. I had seen it in her before, long ago, before we had children, when someone grabbed her arm at a party and she turned into something cold and exact. She had trained in boxing when she was younger. She never bragged about it. She never talked about it unless someone pushed. But when she moved with purpose. She did not swing wild. She did not waste energy. That was what made what happened next feel so final. The pause ended and the impacts began again, heavier now, closer together. I heard my son's breath turn into short, panicked bursts. I heard him hit the wall again. I heard something scrape across the floor, like a chair leg or a small table shifting as bodies moved. I stood there with the baby, and tried to make my mind do two opposite things at once. One part of me wanted to run back into that room and pull my wife away, not because I believed my son deserved mercy in that moment, because I knew what unchecked rage did to a person, because I knew my wife would have to live with her hands afterwards, because I knew that if she went too far, we would lose her too, in a different way. Another part of me did not move at all. That part of me stayed locked to my daughter's skin, to the thin cuts on her face, to the tremor in her breath. That part of me remembered the years before this day, the locks, the knives disappearing, the scars on my own body, the way my son watched fear like it was food. That part of me heard the baby scream again in my memory, and it said, "Do not leave her. Do not risk a second door opening. Do not risk him getting up and coming after you." I told myself I could do both. I told myself I could set the baby down and step in for a second and stop it. But I did not believe my own lie. I had seen my son take advantage of seconds. Seconds were what he lived on. My wife's voice came once, low and raw, like she was speaking to an animal that would not stop. Then another impact followed that sounded like a fist into something soft and human. My son started making sounds that were not threats anymore. They were pleas. At first he did not say words. He just made a choked noise like his throat had closed. Then he said "Mom," and he said it the way a little kid said it when they were truly afraid. The sound ran straight through me. It should have pulled me forward. It did not. It made something hard settle deeper inside me, because that was what he did. He used the right sound at the right moment. He learned which words made people hesitate. He learned which tone made you see a child instead of a weapon. I waited for the apology. I waited for him to say he was sorry for the baby. I waited for him to say he did not mean it. I waited for anything that sounded like remorse. I heard none of that. I heard him begging for himself. My wife did not answer him. She kept moving. I could picture it even without seeing it. Her stance, her shoulders, the trained rhythm that did not stop just because someone cried. When my son tried to cover his face, I heard my wife shift position like she adjusted to what he protected and kept striking. Not random, not blind, controlled, relentless. That was the moment my guilt truly began, because I understood what I was hearing. This was not a parent trying to scare a child straight. This was not discipline. This was not an argument that got out of hand. This was my wife, a woman who had been afraid in her own home for years, releasing everything she had swallowed to keep the peace. And it was my son, the boy who had grown into the source of that fear, finally meeting someone who would not back away. I took 2 steps toward the door of our bedroom. My hand went to the lock. I turned it without thinking and opened the door a crack, just enough to hear more clearly. The hallway smelled like the nursery, like sweat and metal. The sound from inside that room was close enough that I felt it in my teeth. I stood there, holding my daughter with one arm and bracing the door with my shoulder, and I told myself I would go in now. I told myself I would stop it now. Then I heard my daughter make a thin whine against my chest. It was small, almost nothing, but it brought me back to the truth. She needed me more than anyone had ever needed me. She could not run. She could not lock a door. She only had my arms. My wife had chosen. My son had chosen. In that moment, it felt like the only choice left was mine. I closed the bedroom door again and locked it, not because I wanted to trap myself away, because I did not trust what might happen if that door stayed open, because I did not trust him to stay down, because I did not trust my own legs to carry me back into that room once I started, and I could not risk freezing in the doorway while my daughter lay unprotected behind me. I did not throw a punch, but I also did not pull her back. That was the line I crossed, quietly, without a sound, the kind of line you only see when you looked back years later and realized your life had turned. My daughter's breathing stayed uneven. I looked at her face again and saw how little blood there was and how huge it felt anyway. The cuts were thin. They were not deep, but they were there, and the fact that they were there meant that everything we feared had finally happened. I could not stay in the bedroom forever. I needed water. I needed cloth. I needed to clean her face before anything dried. I needed to do something that looked like care, because if I stood still, my mind would break. I cracked the door and listened. The sounds upstairs had not stopped. My wife was still in it. My son was still making those choking, pleading noises. I moved down the hall and toward the stairs, then stopped. Going up would have been the choice to intervene. Going down was the choice to leave it. My feet took me down. The kitchen felt too bright. The sunlight through the window fell on the counter like nothing had changed. The broken mug still lay on the floor where I had dropped it, coffee spreading in a dark stain. It looked ridiculous, like a minor accident in a normal morning. I stepped over it and set my daughter on the table for a second while I grabbed a clean towel. My hands worked on their own. I ran water. I dampened the cloth. I brought it to her cheek as gently as I could. She flinched again and cried, but it was a normal cry now, not the terror scream. That difference made my eyes burn with relief and shame at the same time. Upstairs, the beating continued. Each impact felt like it traveled through the floor and into my arms. I wiped my daughter's face and tried to keep my breathing steady, like I could separate the two worlds. Like I could be a careful father in the kitchen, while my wife did something unforgivable in the room above. But I could not separate it. I could hear everything. In the kitchen, I cleaned my daughter's wounds, while the beating continued upstairs. My hands shook so badly I could not tear the tape clean. The baby lay on the kitchen table on a folded towel, and I tried to make my movements gentle. I kept telling myself the cuts were shallow, that she would heal, that this was only skin. But my fingers did not believe it. My fingers acted like I was holding something that could disappear if I breathed wrong. I wiped her cheek again, and the cloth came away with a thin pink smear. I leaned closer, checking the line near her mouth, then the soft skin under her eye. I looked for depth, for swelling, for anything that meant real damage. Her crying slowed into small gasps. That was a better sound than the terror scream, but it still felt wrong, like the house had changed the shape of her voice forever. Then I saw her foot. One of her feet stuck out from the towel, toes curled tight, and there was another thin cut along the side, a small line that I had missed at first. It made my stomach twist. It meant he had reached in more than once. It meant there had been time. It meant my locked door had bought seconds and my son had used them. I lifted her foot with 2 fingers and she jerked, startled by the touch. The cut was superficial, but it bled enough to leave a bright dot on my fingertip. I rinsed the cloth again and pressed it to the wound. I whispered nonsense to her, sounds meant to calm, while my mind stayed fixed on the upstairs room where my wife still moved like a machine. The impacts continued through the ceiling. The rhythm changed sometimes, like my son tried to crawl away or stand up and my wife pulled him back down. I heard furniture scrape again. I heard the wall thump. I heard my wife breathe out hard with each strike, not words, just force. Then my son started shouting. It was not the begging anymore. It was rage again, spilled out from the floor like poison. He threatened us in broken pieces. He said he would kill her. He said he would kill me. He said he would burn the house. He said he would wait until we slept. He did not sound like someone who had learned a lesson. He sounded like someone who had learned a new reason to hate. Those words turned my fear into something colder. I looked down at my daughter and felt a hard clarity settle in me. If he had lived through this, he would not come out gentle. He would come out worse. The thought arrived without permission, and I hated that it felt true. I wrapped the baby's foot with gauze, then taped it carefully. I used my own shirt for extra padding because I could not stand the idea of her skin rubbing against anything rough. I lifted her again and held her upright against my shoulder, patting her back as if she needed to burp, as if this was an ordinary problem. My arms tightened around her until I realized I might be holding too hard. I forced myself to loosen my grip because she was not the danger. She was the only innocent thing in that house. Upstairs, the sound shifted again, and I heard my wife make a low sound, almost like a growl. Then I heard my son's voice cut off mid-sentence, replaced by a wet cough and a scraping noise like he tried to breathe through pain. I waited for the thud that would mean he stopped moving. I waited for silence. Silence did not come. Minutes passed in a blur. I did not look at the clock. I did not want to know how long it lasted. I only knew the baby had stopped crying and started trembling, tiny shivers against my chest. I walked her back and forth across the kitchen in short steps, eyes fixed on the doorway as if my son might appear there at any moment, knife in hand, blood on his face, smiling. At some point the impacts upstairs slowed. They did not stop, but they came farther apart. My wife's breathing grew louder, and in it I heard exhaustion, not mercy, like she had emptied herself and kept going anyway. Then the nursery door upstairs opened. I heard the hinge squeal. I heard footsteps in the hall above me, heavy and uneven. My wife came down the stairs. She looked like someone who had been in a fight with her life. There was blood on her forearms and on the front of her shirt. Her hands were swollen, knuckles raised, skin split in small places. She kept flexing her fingers like she could not feel them properly. Her face was tight, jaw clenched, eyes bright and flat at the same time. I had never seen her like that, not even in our worst years. She did not ask about the baby. She looked at her once, saw the bandage on the foot, saw me holding her, and nodded like she accepted that part had been handled. Then she stared past me, toward the ceiling, toward the room where she had left our son. Neither of us spoke for a few seconds. It felt like the kitchen held its breath. I finally asked the question that had been burning through me since the moment I closed the bedroom door. "Is he dead?" My voice came out thin and small, and I hated it. I hated that I asked it like I needed permission to feel something. I hated that a part of me wanted the answer to be yes. My wife did not look at me right away. She kept staring upward, listening for movement. When she spoke, her voice sounded emptied out. "I did not know." Then she added, very quietly, as if saying it too loud might invite him back into the room. "He should have been." That was all she said. No apology, no explanation, no tears, just a cold statement of what she believed the moment required. I looked at the blood on her hands and felt my throat tighten. I wanted to say, we needed to call someone. We needed an ambulance. We needed the police. We needed a plan that did not involve hiding in our own home like prey. But the baby shifted against my shoulder and made a soft, sleepy sound. That small sound kept me from moving. It anchored me to the only goal I understood: keep her alive, keep her safe. My wife went to the sink and turned on the water. She washed her hands without reacting to the pain. The water ran red, then pink, then clear. She did not cry. She did not shake. She scrubbed like she wanted to remove the entire day from her skin. Upstairs there was a faint noise, a scrape, a slow, uneven step, then nothing. We stood there in the kitchen, listening, like we were waiting for the house to tell us what we had become. No police sirens, no neighbors, just a kitchen table and two parents staring. The sounds from upstairs changed again. Not impacts this time, not shouting. It was movement, purposeful, like someone tried to stand and failed, then tried again. I looked at my wife, and she looked back at me, and in her eyes I saw the same question I had been avoiding. Was he still alive? And if he was, what came next? When the sounds finally changed, I went back upstairs to look. I went up the stairs like I had walked into burning buildings before, even though nothing smoked. My hands held the keys so tight the teeth pressed into my skin. I kept my head angled, listening for breath, for a sudden rush of feet, for anything that meant he was still able to strike. The nursery door stood half open. The hallway light fell into the room in a thin stripe, and the rest of it stayed shadowed. I stepped closer, and my heart kept trying to climb out of my chest. My son lay on the floor near the wall where my wife had shoved him. He did not move at first. His face was turned away from me. One arm lay bent under him like it had stopped working. The other hand twitched once, small and slow. He was alive. That should have been relief. It should have made me shout for help, run to the phone, do what a normal father did when his child lay broken on the floor. Instead, I felt something else, a heavy quiet inside me, like a door had shut. He made a sound, low and wet, and tried to draw air. His eyes opened partway and found me. Even then, even on the floor, his look still carried that old thing. Not shame, not fear of what he had done. It was anger that he had been stopped. His lips moved. I leaned in without meaning to, and my whole body tensed because I expected a threat. His voice came out rough. He said he was going to kill her. Not today, not now, but he said it like a promise he planned to keep. I stepped back. I looked around the room and saw the knife on the floor near the dresser, where it had skidded after my wife knocked it away. For a second, I had the simple thought that I should pick it up. Then I realized my hands would have to reach past him to do it, and I could not force my body to move that close. I backed out of the nursery and pulled the door almost shut. Not locked, just closed. I did not want the sound of his breathing and his words floating down the stairs. When I reached the kitchen, my wife stood by the sink, still flexing her swollen hands. She saw my face and she knew before I spoke. "Alive," I said. She nodded once like she had expected that answer. Her eyes did not widen. She did not ask how bad. She did not ask if he said anything about the baby. She only listened to the ceiling like she could hear him even from here. We stood in the middle of the kitchen with our daughter sleeping against my shoulder, the bandage on her foot bright against her skin. The house looked normal around us. Plates, a chair pushed in, the clock still ticking. It felt like a trap, like the world tried to pretend nothing had happened. We both knew what the next step was supposed to be. Call an ambulance, call the police, tell someone, hand control of the situation to people with uniforms and rules. But the idea of bringing outsiders into our home made my stomach clench. Not because I feared judgment, because I saw the chain of consequences so clearly it felt like it had already happened. I pictured officers walking through the nursery. I pictured my wife's swollen hands. I pictured our baby's cuts and the questions that would follow. I pictured my son's story, the way he could twist a truth until it sounded like he was the victim. I pictured him sitting up in a hospital bed, glaring at us, learning which words to say to make someone believe him. I also pictured what would happen if we called for help and he lived. I pictured him coming home later, angrier, smarter, with a new list of grudges. I pictured him waiting in the dark for my wife to unlock a door. My wife broke the silence first. "If we call," she said, "they will take her." She meant the baby. She meant that someone might decide we were not safe parents, that our home was too violent, that our daughter would be removed from us because of something our son did and something she did to stop it. I did not correct her. I did not say that was unlikely or unfair. Fear did not care about fairness. Fear only cared that it felt possible. Then she said something else, quieter. "If we call, he will come back." She did not mean back from the hospital that day. She meant back into our lives with power again, back into our home, back into the center of every hour. I looked down at my daughter's face, peaceful now, and I felt my throat tighten. I knew I should have cared about my son's life. I knew I should have felt horror at the idea of leaving him injured upstairs. I did not. The words came out before I could stop them. "I do not care what happens to him," I said. Saying it did not shock me. That was the worst part. It sounded like something I had been carrying for years, waiting for a moment when it would finally be allowed to exist. My wife stared at me for a long time, then she nodded again. We talked in short sentences after that, like any longer words might crack us open. "We cannot stay up here," she said. "No," I said. "He will come down," she said. "Yes," I said. We had an in-law suite in the basement. It had a separate entrance from the side of the house. We had used it for storage and for family visits. That day it became our escape route inside our own home. We moved quickly, quietly. We packed like people preparing for a storm, except the storm already lived upstairs. I carried the baby and my wife carried blankets, diapers, formula, anything we needed so we would not have to go up and down. I grabbed the phone, but I did not dial. I grabbed the keys, all of them, and clipped them to my belt so they could not be taken easily. At the top of the basement stairs, my wife stopped and looked back toward the main floor, toward the hallway that led to the nursery. Her jaw tightened. I saw something like regret flicker in her face, but it did not turn into mercy. It turned into resolve. We went down and closed the basement door behind us. Then we locked it. Then we added a second latch we had installed months earlier, back when we still believed we could manage him with hardware. The basement felt colder. The air smelled like concrete and laundry soap. The small kitchen down there looked unfinished compared to the one upstairs, but it had a sink, a fridge, and a door that led outside. For the first time that day, I felt like we had a wall between our daughter and him that he could not defeat in seconds. We decided on rules, the way soldiers decided on positions. We would not go upstairs alone. We would not open the basement door unless we heard him far away. We would keep our keys on us at all times. We would sleep in shifts if we had to. We would treat the upstairs like hostile territory. We also did something I still struggled to say out loud, even decades later. We left food upstairs for him. My wife put bread and water and a few cans on the kitchen counter, along with a note that said nothing except where more was. Not because we wanted to care for him, because we did not want him coming down hungry and desperate. We wanted him contained by his own comfort, by the ability to stay away from us. Their solution was not healing, it was containment. We sat in the basement living room with our daughter between us, listening to the house above. Every creak made my shoulders rise. Every small sound made my mind race through the same question. Was he standing at the top of the stairs? For a while there was nothing. Then very faintly we heard him. A slow step, a drag, another step, a cabinet opening, something falling and rolling. He moved around upstairs, injured but awake, and we stayed where we were. We listened, we held our daughter, we did not call anyone. Upstairs we could still hear him moving, and we did nothing. I did not write about what happened because I wanted forgiveness. I wrote because I could not make my own mind agree with itself. Decades had passed. My daughter had grown into an adult with a life that felt almost impossible when she was a baby on that kitchen table. My wife had died after a long illness that took her strength in slow pieces, and my son had stayed a blank space. No calls, no letters, no news, just a missing person who had once lived upstairs and promised to kill us. In therapy, I kept circling the same moment, the knife over the crib, the way my wife moved, the way I did not. My therapist suggested I write it down in full, without excuses, and then share it somewhere anonymous if I wanted to see how other people held the facts. Not to be judged as good or bad, but to see what moral shape strangers gave the same event. So I posted it online late one night. I kept it simple. A father, a mother, a teenage son, an infant, a locked room, a knife, superficial cuts on the baby, the mother knocking the knife away and beating the teenager, the father leaving with the baby, the parents not calling for help and hiding in the basement. As soon as I pressed submit, I felt sick. It felt like I had opened my front door again and invited the whole street inside. I told myself I could close the tab and forget it, but I refreshed the page anyway, again and again, like I was waiting for a verdict that might finally tell me who I had been. The first replies hit like cold water, not because they were cruel, because they were confident. People who had never stood in that hallway spoke like they knew exactly what the right move was. Some defended us without hesitation. Others condemned us like they had been in the nursery with a clipboard. Reading them felt like being placed on trial by strangers who had only my words and their own fear. One camp formed quickly in my mind as I read. I started nomming them, not because they named themselves, but because I needed categories to survive the flood. The first camp was protect the baby first. These people treated the knife over the crib as a line that erased normal rules. To them, the moment my son entered that nursery with a blade, the situation became life or death. They focused on timing, seconds, the tiny window between a shallow cut and a deep one, between a warning and a murder. They wrote as if hesitation was the real sin. In that lens, my wife had acted like a guard dog, not a mother, fast, violent, necessary. They did not care about the details of the beating. They cared that the knife had been there at all. They believed that once a child was targeted, a parent had a duty to stop the threat by any means. Some of them pointed out what I still struggled to admit, that I had seen my son hurt people before, that we had locks and keys for a reason, that we had lived in fear long before the baby arrived. When I read that camp, my chest loosened in a way that scared me. Relief felt too close to permission. The second camp was violence is still violence. These people separated the first strike from everything after it. They accepted that knocking the knife away was defense. They accepted that shoving him into a wall might have been necessary, but they drew a hard line at what came next. In their view, once the knife left his hand, the immediate threat ended, Everything after that became punishment. They described it in a way that made my skin crawl. They said the mother crossed from protection into revenge. They said she kept going because she wanted him to suffer, not because she needed to stop him. And then they turned their focus on me, which was harder to read than anything about my wife. They treated my decision to leave the room as participation, not passive, not helpless. They argued that a person did not need to swing a fist to be complicit. They believed I had a responsibility to pull her back, to call for help, to stop the violence once the weapon was gone. They said I chose not to, and that choice made me part of it. That camp did not talk like they hated me. They talked like they had measured the event and found it morally simple. And that hurt, because nothing had felt simple in that hallway. It made me wonder if my complexity was just self-protection. The third camp was the system failed this family. These comments read differently, less like a verdict, more like an autopsy. They looked past the nursery and asked what kind of home ended up with internal locks and keyed doors. They read the story as the end of a long collapse, not a single explosion. They pointed to the years of treatment, the attempts at therapy and medication, the constant escalation. They treated my wife's violence as a symptom of chronic terror, and my inaction as the numbness that arrived when fear became daily life. They did not excuse what happened. They did not call it right. They called it predictable. They said families could be broken slowly, like bending metal back and forth until it snapped. They wrote that people who lived under constant threat did not make clean decisions. They made survival decisions. When I read that camp, I felt seen in a way that was almost worse than being judged, because it suggested there had never been a safe path, only different kinds of damage. The fourth camp was parents still had duty of care. These people did not argue about the knife or the fear. They argued about what came after. They focused on the moment we decided not to call. They treated that as the real turning point. In their view, we had an obligation to get medical care for our son even if he had hurt the baby. They said abandoning an injured person upstairs crossed a legal line and a human line. They said a parent did not stop being a parent because the child was dangerous. They believed the basement decision was neglect, even if it was motivated by fear. Some of them stressed the risk we took by leaving him untreated. They said he could have died. They said he could have suffered brain damage. They said we had created a situation where anything could happen upstairs and we would pretend we could not hear it. They did not accept containment as a solution. They saw it as cowardice. That camp forced me to remember details I usually tried to blur. The sound of him moving, the way we listened and did nothing, the cold practicality of leaving food like we were feeding an animal we were afraid to approach. As I read more, those four camps started blending at the edges. People argued with each other using my family like a case study. Some said the only true duty was to protect the baby. Some said the only true duty was to reject violence even in fear. Some said the state should have intervened long before any knife appeared. Some said we should have called the moment the beating stopped, no matter what it cost us. I kept scrolling until my eyes burned. Every comment felt like a different person grabbing the same photograph and describing a different crime. And that was the strange part. The facts did not change. A teenage boy had stood over a crib with a knife. An infant had bled. A mother had attacked. A father had left the room. A house had been split into zones like a war map. Silence had followed where sirens should have been. Same facts, different moral lenses. Protection, punishment, and responsibility. I tried to hold all those lenses at once, and I could not. Each one forced a different version of me into the light. In one version, I was a father who did what any father did. In another, I was a coward. In another, I was a man trapped inside a system that offered no good exits. In another, I was a person who failed a basic duty and then hid behind fear. I sat in the dark with my phone in my hand, and it felt like I was back in the basement again, listening to movement above me and waiting for a sound that would tell me what kind of monster I lived with. Then a different kind of comment appeared. It was not about parenting. It was not about law. It was not about self-defense. It was about what my son was. Some readers treated him as a child in crisis, someone whose mind had been broken, someone who needed help even when he hurt others. Others treated him as something else, a danger wearing the shape of a child, a person who used family bonds as cover. I realized I had been avoiding that question for years, because it made every answer ugly. And then the hardest question arrived. Was the son a child in crisis or a danger that had to be stopped? The more I read, the more I understood that strangers did not only judge what I did. They judged what kind of world I lived in, and they judged what they believed a family owed each other when fear became normal. A fifth camp showed up that did not care about motives at all. I thought of them as call emergency help always. They wrote as if there was one rule that never changed, no matter how violent the person was. Call. Immediately. They focused on the moment after the fight, the moment my wife came downstairs with swollen hands, the moment I stood in the kitchen and said I did not know what to do. They argued that this was exactly when the phone should have been used. Not later, not after a debate, not after sleep. Right then, while adrenaline still held the situation in place. They listed practical reasons, not moral ones. They said injuries could kill quietly, even when someone still talked. They said head trauma could turn into death hours later. They said shock could make a person seem stable and then collapse. They said the longer we waited, the worse the medical outcome could be. Then they pointed to the other kind of risk, the legal kind. They argued that delay did not erase the event, it only made it look planned. They said waiting made it easier for authorities to interpret it as a cover-up, not a crisis. They said professionals existed for exactly this moment, police and paramedics and crisis teams, and that refusing to use them was not just fear. It was a choice to keep control. I read those replies and I remembered my hand holding the phone in the basement, my thumb hovering, my mind blank. I had used the phrase "I did not know what to do" because it sounded less ugly than the truth. I didn't know what to do. I knew that calling might bring him back into our lives with a new kind of power. I knew it might also take our daughter away. I knew it might expose my wife as someone who had crossed a line. I knew it might expose me as a man who stood there and let it happen. I did not want help. I wanted the danger to vanish. The sixth camp felt more careful. Trauma explains, not excuses. They wrote as if they could see the years behind my words, even though I had not described all of them in detail. They talked about chronic fear like it was a slow poison. They said a home could train a body to live in fight, flight, or freeze until those became the only options. They described numbness as a kind of emergency shutoff. They said people sometimes did cruel things while trying to survive, and the mind later protected itself by rewriting the story into something cleaner. They did not call my wife a monster. They called her a person who broke under pressure. They did not call me evil. They called me someone who dissociated, someone who focused on the baby because it was the only place my mind could rest without collapsing. But then they drew the line. They said understanding did not erase responsibility. They said fear could explain why I did not move, but it could not change what my inaction caused. They said my son's violence did not make my wife's violence disappear. They said both could be true at the same time, that a person could be a victim and an aggressor in the same hour. Those replies hit me in a different way because they sounded like my therapist. They did not offer me a label I could hide behind. They offered me a mirror. The seventh camp was the one I feared most before I even posted. Skeptics and reality checks. They did not call me a liar outright. They asked questions that made me feel exposed. They questioned the locks and the keys. They asked how a teenage boy got into a locked nursery. They asked how knives kept appearing if we tried to control them. They asked why neighbors did not call if there was screaming and impacts. They asked for a clearer timeline, clearer ages, clearer descriptions of what happened first and what happened next. Some of them suggested that extreme stories often came out sharper than reality because memory worked that way. Trauma did not record events like a camera. It recorded pieces, sensations, the worst images, the worst sounds, and then it filled the gaps later. They warned other readers not to build a moral verdict on details that might be distorted. I wanted to argue with them. I wanted to insist that I remembered everything perfectly, but the truth was I did not. I remembered the knife. I remembered the baby's scream. I remembered my wife's hands. I remembered my son's voice promising to kill us even while he lay on the floor. But I did not remember the exact order of every sound. I did not remember how many minutes passed. I did not remember what I said word for word. The skeptics made me realize something humiliating, that even if every fact I wrote was accurate, the internet would still treat it like a story first and a confession second. And then there was an eighth camp that felt almost cold in its certainty: protect the daughter's future. They spoke as if the knife incident was not the climax, but the proof that the situation was not fixable inside a family home, proof that the older child could not be safely housed with the baby, proof that no amount of therapy or rules could make a crib safe from someone determined to reach it. They supported separation not as punishment, but as a boundary that should have happened earlier. They argued that no contact could be self-protection, not cruelty. They said moving later to a new home made sense, because the old house held patterns that would always be triggered by a creak in the hallway or a door closing upstairs. They emphasized the daughter's development, her right to grow up without living under a ceiling where someone might move in the night. When I read that camp, I felt a deep, guilty relief again, because that was the part of my life that had worked. My daughter had been safe after we drew that boundary. She had grown up without him in her daily air, and I hated that safety had a price. By the time I finished reading, the comment camps had turned into a loud courtroom in my head. I could hear each side making its case, each one certain that their moral framework was the only one that mattered. Some readers saw justified survival, others saw inexcusable cruelty and neglect. Some saw a broken system, others saw two adults who made a decision and then hid inside it. I stared at the screen until the words blurred, and then I closed the page and sat in the quiet, because none of it changed the only thing that mattered. It did not change what happened upstairs. It did not change what I did next. After the knife incident, the internet could argue forever about what we should have done. But the truth was that we had already chosen containment over healing, and we had done it while our son still moved above our heads. In the basement, that first night did not feel like one long stretch of time. It felt like separate pieces. There was the part where we tried to sleep and could not. There was the part where we fed the baby and listened to the ceiling. There was the part where every pipe noise sounded like a footstep. There was the part where we held our breath each time we heard him shift upstairs, waiting for the stair tread that would mean he had found the basement door. We kept the lights low, not because light would reveal us to him, but because the darkness felt closer to hiding. We spoke in whispers even when we did not need to. That habit had formed in us over the years, like we had trained ourselves not to attract attention inside our own home. At one point, my wife stood with her ear near the basement door and listened so long her legs trembled. When she finally stepped back, her face looked older. She said he was moving slow, like he was hurt badly but not hurt enough. I asked if we should go up and check again. The question left my mouth and died in the air between us. My wife stared at me like she could not believe I had said it. "Go up," she repeated, and her voice stayed flat. "You wanted to go up." I did not answer, because I did not want to go up. I wanted to be the kind of man who went up. I wanted to feel like I had not abandoned something human. But fear had erased that version of me. Fear, and the memory of a knife drawn across my baby's face in a taunting way. We listened again. A cabinet opened. A glass clinked. Water ran briefly. Then a sound like a body lowering onto a chair, followed by a long silence. That silence should have comforted me. It did not. Silence was never safety in that house. Silence was what came before something changed. My wife finally spoke the sentence that proved how far we had slipped away from normal. "If he dies up there," she said, "we will say we did not know." I looked at her swollen hands, at the split skin, and I realized she had already built a story for the outside world. Not to trick anyone for fun, but to survive consequences. To protect our daughter from a system that might not understand what our home had been. I thought about the camp online that said call emergency help always. I thought about the camp that said duty of care never ended. I thought about the camp that said trauma explained my numbness. And then I thought about the simplest truth. In that basement, we did not act like parents anymore. We acted like people trapped with a predator in the room above us. Hours passed. The baby slept and woke and slept again. My wife and I did not take turns sleeping like we claimed we would. We just drifted into half rest, snapping awake at every sound. I kept my keys on my belt. My wife kept a heavy flashlight beside her like a weapon. We did not speak about the knife. We did not speak about the beating. We did not speak about what would happen if he came down those stairs. We only listened. Online judgment could not change what happened upstairs, but it could change how we named it. I could call it survival. I could call it neglect. I could call it the system failing us. I could call it evil. Every name carried a different kind of weight. But none of those names changed the ceiling above the basement. Because the danger did not end when the knife hit the floor. It did not end when my wife came downstairs. It did not end when we locked the basement door. It stayed in the house with us, moving slowly across the main floor, dragging a foot, opening cabinets, testing doors, learning our silence. So what happened after we hid in the basement? Did the danger end, or did it simply move? We stayed in that basement for 3 weeks, and each day felt like a test of whether the house still belonged to us. At first I counted the noises: footsteps above, a drawer opening, a chair scraping, the water running. Then the pattern changed and I stopped counting because counting made me believe there was a pattern I could learn. There was not. Some hours he stayed quiet, and that quiet made my skin crawl more than the movement ever did. Quiet meant he could be listening. Quiet meant he could be waiting by the basement door, learning our routine. I slept in short pieces. When I closed my eyes, I saw the nursery light and the knife. When I woke, I listened for my daughter's breathing first, then for his. I did not say his name. My wife did not either. We spoke about him like he was weather, like he was a sound in the house, like he was not a person we had raised. During the day, we heard him limp from room to room. We heard him cough sometimes, a wet sound that told me his ribs or his lungs hurt. Each time I heard it, a small part of me wanted to go up, to check if he was dying, to do something that looked like duty. Then I would remember his eyes on the nursery floor and the promise he made through swollen lips. I would remember how easily he had reached for a baby with a blade. And the part of me that wanted to help would fold up and disappear again. My wife stayed sharper than I did. She kept the flashlight near her. She kept the keys on her belt when I tried to take them off her so she could rest. Her hands stayed swollen for days, knuckles yellowing, fingers stiff, but she never complained. The only time I saw her shake was when our daughter cried in her sleep. My wife would jerk awake, eyes wide, like she had heard that terror scream again. Once in the second week, my wife whispered something that I never forgot. "If he comes down here," she said, "I will finish it." She said it without drama, like she was stating a rule about fire safety. I did not argue. I believed her. And a part of me was relieved that someone in that basement had a clear plan, because I did not trust myself to move fast if the door burst open. The worst night came near the end of the third week. It started with a quiet that lasted too long. No footsteps, no cabinets, no water, just the soft hum of the basement refrigerator and the baby's breathing. Then above us something smashed. Not one thing, many things. A crash, then another, then the sound of glass breaking like rain. I heard wood splinter. I heard a heavy thud that shook dust from the basement ceiling, like a table had been thrown on its side. My daughter startled awake and began to cry, and my wife covered her mouth gently, trying to keep the sound small without hurting her. Upstairs he moved like a storm. He did not scream. He did not threaten. He destroyed. I sat on the basement floor with my back against the wall, holding the baby close, staring at the locked door as if I could see through it. My wife stood with the flashlight raised, waiting for the handle to turn. It did not. The destruction stayed upstairs, contained by his choice, not by our locks. After an hour the smashing slowed, then it stopped. The silence that followed felt heavier than the noise. It felt like a room after a fight, when you realize someone had left with a decision. In the morning, I could not stand it anymore. I told my wife I was going up. She did not try to stop me. She only said, "Take the keys and do not be brave." I moved up the basement stairs slowly, listening at each step. I unlocked the door and opened it a crack. The air on the main floor smelled wrong. Not smoke, not rot. Just a sharp mix of spilled food, broken wood, and something sour like a fridge left open. The kitchen looked like it had been hit by a truck. Cabinets hung open. Plates lay shattered across the floor. The chair near the table was broken. One leg snapped clean off. The note my wife had left near the food was torn into thin strips and scattered like confetti. I walked farther in and saw more damage. Pictures off the walls, drawers dumped out. The couch cushions sliced, stuffing spilled like guts. The phone cord was pulled from the wall, the line dead. He had not only raged, he had made sure we could not call for help easily, even if we changed our minds. I called his name once, quiet, and my voice sounded wrong in that wrecked house. There was no answer. I checked the hallway. The nursery door stood open. The crib was still there, but the room looked stripped of anything soft. Blankets thrown. A lamp broken. The knife was gone. I moved from room to room, forcing myself to look into corners, behind doors, under beds, because fear told me this could be an ambush. Each empty room made my heart beat harder, not softer. Empty meant he could be anywhere. Finally, I reached the front door, and I saw it. The door was unlocked. The deadbolt sat open. He had left. No note, no goodbye, no apology, no warning about where he would go, just absence. I stood in the entryway staring at the open lock like it was a mouth left hanging open. I waited for the relief to hit me. When it came, it was so strong it made my knees weak. Then the guilt followed right behind it, quick and sharp, because I realized what my relief meant. A father was supposed to be afraid for his missing son. I was afraid of his return. We stayed cautious for weeks after that. Even with him gone, we moved through the house like it was still occupied. I checked locks twice. I stood at windows longer than I should have. At night, every car door outside made me sit up in bed, waiting for footsteps on our porch. We repaired the house because we had to. We replaced a phone. We fixed cabinets. We cleaned up broken glass we kept finding days later, hidden in corners. Each repair felt like erasing evidence, and that thought made my stomach turn because it was true in more than one way. Over the years, we did what people do when a place holds too much fear. We tried to start over without saying that was what we were doing. We eventually moved to a new home in a different area. The first night there, I slept deeper than I had in years, and when I woke I hated myself for how good it felt. My daughter learned to walk on new floors. She learned to laugh without flinching at footsteps above her. My wife began to smile again, small at first, like she did not trust happiness not to be punished. We never heard from my son, not as a teenager, not as a young man, not as an adult. No calls, no letters, no sudden appearance at the door. Each year that passed without him felt like proof that the house had been a turning point for him too, even if I did not know what kind. Decades later, my wife got sick. The illness took her slowly, and watching her fade felt like punishment arriving late. In the hospital, She sometimes stared at her hands like she could still feel that day in her bones. She never spoke about the nursery. I never forced her to. Some subjects were too heavy to carry in words when you were already carrying death. When she died, I did not only grieve her. I grieved the person she had been before fear trained her into a fighter inside her own home. I also felt something that made me ashamed. Relief. Relief that she did not have to keep listening for footsteps anymore. After her funeral, I moved in with my daughter and her family for a while. That was when I returned to therapy seriously. My therapist asked me to name the truth without dressing it up. So I did. I admitted that I was glad my wife attacked him. I admitted that I was glad I did not stop her. I admitted that a part of me wished he had not gotten back up from that floor. And I admitted something even darker. I still did not want contact. People assumed time softened things. They assumed a missing child, even a violent one, left a hole that demanded to be filled. But what I felt was a different kind of emptiness. It was not longing. It was a space where danger used to live. I carried guilt anyway, not the simple guilt of one bad decision, the layered guilt of years, the guilt that I had not protected him when he was small enough to be guided, the guilt that I had protected my daughter by abandoning him, the guilt that my wife had become the kind of mother who could almost kill her own child, and that I had watched and locked the door. The son left the house, but the question never left me. I wrote about it because I needed other minds to hold it for a moment, to test the weight of it from different angles. And now I asked you the same thing I asked myself in that kitchen, in that basement, in the years that followed. If you were in that locked house, would you have stopped the beating? Or would you have protected the baby at any cost? And what kind of help should exist for families living for years with violence behind closed doors?